we're going to start looking into the integumentary system. This will be the first of the organ systems in this course. Now, when you start thinking about the integumentary system, you're thinking skin, hair, nails. You're thinking, oh, that's not an organ. Well, think about what organs are. Organs are two or more tissues working together. From the histology we discussed, we know that your skin has stratified squamous epithelium. It's going to have dense irregular connective tissue, areolar connective tissue. We're going to have adipose connective tissue. There's vascular tissue in there. We'll find out there's even some muscular and nervous tissue in there. So it's definitely an organ. So let's look at the integumentary system. It is the cutaneous membrane. Basically, that means your skin, cutaneous membrane. Now what we'll see is the hair, the skin, the nails, those are all the components that make up this whole integumentary system. When you start looking at the actual diagram here, you're going to notice that you see some things that are drawn in. Things along like the idea of the skin, having different layers to it. You can have the hair with different parts and pieces, different tiny little structure and individual unicellular or multicellular glands found within the skin. We need to go through all of those as we move our way through the system. The skin is broken up into three major regions. Now, you'll see here we have the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. They all have dermis, but epi meaning above, that's what's on the surface. That's what you can touch, the epidermis. Below that's the dermis, and the bottom, the hypo, below, that is the bottom portion of it. Just before we get into more adipose or get into the muscles and bones. Now that hypodermis usually has mostly adipose, but you've got a lot of areolar in there as well. We'll get into the actual hair and nails a little bit later on in this unit. So looking at the epidermis, so we'll start with the top layer here. The epidermis itself is going to have keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Now, keratinized, that means the cells contain keratin. Keratin is a fibrous protein. It's what helps to give the structure and strength, especially to your nails, as well as the kind of waterproofing ability your skin has. It's avascular. The idea of avascular is without blood, which means if you think back to when we talked about the epithelial tissue before, we were talking about the stratified squamous there and other epithelial tissues. We said they're avascular, but they are supported by the connective tissue. Same thing here. The epidermis, which is this whole entire picture you're seeing here, except the very bottom. So everything from this is all epidermis. It's all avascular. There's no blood. This is only the very top little portion of the skin. So without having blood, all the nutrients must be coming from the connective tissue below, diffusing up. You can see we have the surface cells being dead. Sure, the skin surface is dead. One, you don't want the living cells up top that hurt if you had problems. But two, this way the dead cells can just slough off. They can just be brushed off as you touch things, as you interact with the world around. They're a way of trying to protect the living cells below. Nerve endings, there's not a whole lot. They're pretty sparse in this case. The reason that we have this is you still have innervation. You can still tell what's going on, but there's more nerve receptors down in the actual dermis. And we're going to have 4 distinct cell types. We'll get to those in a second. And 4 or 5 layers. Now, the reason there's a variable in the layers is you'll have 4 layers everywhere in your body, but you'll have the extra 5th layer, palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. So we'll get to that also in a second. Let's start with the cells. The keratinocytes. Now, the keratinocytes, if you look at the diagram, all of these cells, all those yellow cells are keratinocytes. Now, even as they move further up towards the surface, they are still keratinocytes. They're just dying off. So what keratinocytes are going to be the basis of the main cell type in your epithelial tissue. So yes, there's stratified squamous epithelium, but the specialized cell is called the keratinocyte. Now these keratinocytes really make up the majority of everything that's inside of our epithelial layer. So our keratinocytes start off living, as they move up, they eventually end up dying off. Melanocytes. Now melanocytes, you can see one right here. Melanocytes are going to produce melanin. Melanin is going to be a pigment of the skin. Melanin has a brown to black pigmentation to it. The whole idea behind producing this melanin is the melanin will be put into the keratinocytes. They kind of absorb it. And those keratinocytes, they'll store it on the sunny side of the cells. So as you see these little dots I'm drawing in, the idea is it's on the sunny side, which is the side closer to the surface, but it's shielding the nucleus of the cell. The point of all of this melanin is to try and prevent the nucleus from having the UV radiation reach it, because that UV radiation can actually cause damage to the nucleus. So what we're trying to do is you're trying to get rid of the radiation damaging tissue, which pretty much means the more melanin you have, the more UV protection you have. That's also why if you ever are in the summer outside a lot, you'll notice your skin gets a little bit darker. That's because the more UV exposure you have, the more melanin will be produced. So your body's trying to basically protect itself. That's the whole point of melanin, protecting your nuclei of your cells from UV radiation. Langerhans cells. Now, Langerhans cells are going to be cells found again in the epidermis. They're phagocytotic. The whole point is they're meant to phagocytize anything that's harmful or shouldn't be there. This could be foreign pathogens that somehow got into your skin. It could be cells that have died off and are breaking apart. The idea is anything that shouldn't be there is being removed by these Langerhans cells. Now, the diagram itself doesn't have any Langerhans cells, but usually they're going to simply just be put in between where the keratinocytes are. And then they're kind of branching out to make sure that they're spreading out and feeling around to see if anything needs to be phagocytized or destroyed. So you can have these Langerhans cells just embedded in between the keratinocytes. Merkel cells. Now, Merkel cells are going to be touch receptors. This is a Merkel cell right here. If you notice, that Merkel cell is going to have a sensory neuron attached just below it. That's because if you want to have this be a touch receptor, so a sensory receptor, there has to be some way for getting that information up into the actual nervous system. So we have our Merkel cells, or our light touch receptors. So when something just barely touches the skin, that would be triggering a Merkel cell response. So those are the 4 different cell types. Next, we got to move into the different layering systems. So there's still more to do in the epidermis, which is the epithelial tissue, but just a little starting point to get things started and get things moving.